Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. Welcome to this week's live chat where I come on every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central to talk about quilting, answer your questions live, and just have a good old fun time. Coming to you from just outside Kansas City where the weather is gorgeous. We have never, ever in the history of Missouri had so many nice days in a row, but I think it's getting ready to get cold. But I was trying to think about what I was going to talk about today because I always want there to be some kind of teachable thing. And I'm just at that time of year where I have so many things going that I cannot wait to tell you about, but I can't tell you about them. I had literally just 15 minutes ago, got the test prints for the panel for the next challenge. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about it. Can't wait to show that to you in the next couple weeks. I am quilting some quilts for Tula Pink for her quilt market booth. Really fun fabric. I'm sure she's shown them on her Tuesday chats, but working on that. Can't show pictures of that. Plus, fun news, I got commissioned to make a quilt for the daughter of a famous R&B singer. And so I've been working on that. So it's just kind of crazy to think about all the things that eventually I will get to tell you. So I was thinking, wow, what can I show them? Well, this is about the only thing I can show you that I finished. It's just a cute little EPP block with my inked fabric collection. What I think is kind of ironic is as much as I do not like hand sewing, I don't like binding, I don't like any kind of handwork except EPP. I kind of love it and I'm super addicted. So I've been making these rounds and I'm going to put them on fabric. So anyway, so I was looking at this, like the only thing I can show you that I finished. And I thought, well, this will be a great topic, quilting busy fabrics, and also a great promotion for you guys. So this is featuring prints from my inked fabric collection, inked, I-N-K-E-D. And so I'm doing for my live chat guests 30% off any of the yardage for inked or the fat quarter bundle. And there's a link in the description box, and that's only good through next week. And so again, it's 30% off. Use promo code inked, 30% off any of the inked fabric. But when I was looking at it, I thought, well, I could talk about tips for picking quilting designs for busy fabrics. And I know I kind of hit on this topic not too long ago, but it can be one of those daunting areas to deal with. So I pulled together some pictures from past quilts that I've done. I'm going to give you some tips and then open it up for a robust Q&A. So it's kind of like a ask me anything. If you're watching live and you have any particular questions, please go ahead and type them in now. Jessica is here as always, monitoring the chat, making sure the spammers get kicked off when they show up, and she'll bring me the questions at the end. And so I'm excited to go over all that. And then there have been some great questions come up in the type chat before I went live. So questions about extra wide backing and the elusive midnight quilt show patterns. So I'll talk about both of those. But first, let's talk about the fun stuff. It's all fun stuff. Let's talk about what to do with busy fabrics. So here's the thing about quilters. We love fabrics. We love to touch them, fondle them, collect them, even sometimes use them in our quilts. And I know that sometimes once we have finally put that beautiful piece of fabric into the quilt, it can be difficult to decide how to quilt it. So I pulled out a section from one of my trunk shows, my presentations that I do about busier fabrics. And I think the thing to remember is that you picked that fabric for a reason. So let's use that as the inspiration for your quilting. Now, I kind of want to pause and say, if you have watched any of my live chats or any of my videos or anything like that, you know I love machine quilting and I love quilting things to death and putting a lot of details in there. You definitely don't have to do that to have an impactful quilt. So even if you just do an all over your whole quilt, it's still going to look great. Remember, a finished quilt is always better than a perfect quilt top. But if you're wanting to enhance the fabric, you want to show that off. That's one of the most important things about the quilt. How can you handle those areas? And a couple things we can look at are the designs in the print, the colors, or some element in there that we can pull out. But I will tell you, one of my favorite ways to handle these fabrics is definitely just to quilt along the lines of the design. I figure somebody has already taken the time to put together that beautiful detail. Let's just highlight it with the quilting. But it doesn't have to be as difficult as you think, I promise. So let's look through some of these and see kind of what I'm talking about. Now, you probably know I quilt for Tula Pink. It's kind of funny. I started quilting for her when I was pregnant with my youngest daughter, and she's now 13. So we've been together for quite a while. And her fabrics are usually the most important thing of the quilt. You know, she's obviously stellar fabric designer, all around talented, crazy talented gal. And so usually I'm showing off the fabric or highlighting the fabric with the quilting. And one thing I love to do is feature that print either by using designs around it to help frame it, to help kind of be the parentheses around it to say, hey, in case you're wondering where to look, you should look here. And so even in areas outside of the fabric, you can use the quilting in those areas to help highlight it. Now, let's be honest, this is a bright, bold, fun print in the center of this block. There really isn't much I could do to take away from it. And I don't think it really needs a lot of help being highlighted, but you know, I love to overthink the quilting, and adding those little framing elements around the outside is just an easy way to do it. Now, when I talk about quilting around the elements in the fabric, or, you know, looking at the design and kind of highlighting that with the quilting, the one thing you have to remember is you don't have to quilt around every single line. Tula's prints, especially her focal prints, are so detailed. I can't even wrap my mind around how much detail and shading are in that fabric. And so to try to quilt around all that would not only be almost impossible, it would actually detract from it, like trying to go around every little element. So I'm just kind of hitting the high notes, right? So in that little group of flowers under the face, I'm just quilting a flower shape. And around those kind of design around her head, kind of like the crown or those pearls, just going around the outside of it, just to kind of give that hint or kind of just show like, hey, this is kind of the fun part. And in the rest, just doing an all over design. You might think, oh, if I do some crazy dense back and forth lines around it, it's going to really take away from the, you know, that print, but it doesn't. Your eye kind of goes through that texture and still sees the prints. So look at the fabric and ask yourself, you know, what is it that I want to show off, and quilt along it and have fun with it. Now, if I'm doing this, I'm usually like 99.9% of the time trying to use a thread color that blends in with the quilt top. This is not the time for my quilting to be the star. And if at all possible, I try not to quilt on faces. It is so easy to make a face look incorrect. So I try really, really hard. Thankfully, this print, the face was pretty small and I could get away with not quilting it. But even if I had to, I would have maybe just quilted a line along the separation between the pink and the white. Again, it's very easy to mess up faces because we all know what that's supposed to look like, and we know when it's not right. And so this can apply to your very bold focal prints, but you can also apply this to other areas, other quilts as well, other fabrics as well, especially ones that are more blenders or have some detail in the background. And this was also another one from Tula's quilts. Cute little bee, and I loved that little lattice work around the outside, so just a easy quilting around the outside. Sometimes I do feel guilty because, you know, she's done all the hard work. I'm just kind of following the lines. But again, it's just a really fun way to show off the fabric. All right, so in that vein, I quilted this quilt for Allison Glass a long time ago, but it was such a fun exercise, and it was totally her idea. She gave me, this was actually the quilt top, very minimally pieced, a little bit of piecing, a lot of linen on both sides, and then she gave me the backing fabric, but she wanted me to quilt it from the back side up. So when I loaded this on my long arm, this was actually on the top, and the front was on the bottom, and I quilted around those elements on that quilt and on that fabric. And what was fun is when you took it off and bound it, you can see just a hint of all those pretty designs on there. So a great way to use a fabric as an all-over quilting design, and not have to mark. That would be nice. And, you know, just having fun with it. So I thought that was a really cool idea. Again, I felt a little guilty getting paid to, you know, quilt along the lines. But again, just like we saw with Tula's, you don't have to quilt around every element, and you don't have to go crazy with it. Just adding a little bit of those details really is a fun way to do it. And here's just some closer up pictures of it. Like even in the flower where I'm kind of quilting those lines that kind of accentuate the detail in there, it's not perfectly on the printed lines. It's just kind of giving that little bit of a hint there. And then in the rest of the fabric or anywhere that I didn't want to go around the outline, I just quilted swirls and paisleys and a nice all over design just to kind of give it some consistency. So again, really fun way if you have that perfect fabric that you don't want to cut up, but you want to feature it. I just thought that was a lot of fun. Now, this was actually from an earlier Free Motion Challenge, Quilting Along. That's a video series I do fairly regularly where we work through a project together. Even if you are outlining some elements in that quilt or that panel or that fabric, you don't have to go around all the details even within that whole print. So here in the center of that, this is that Dream Big panel, very, very popular a few years back. I decided in the center to go around some of those petals to highlight those, add some echoing and details. However, in the rest of the petals around the outside, I just did some all over wavy lines just to kind of help flatten down that area. And what happens is I get that pop in the center, and then the back just kind of recedes. So a great way to maybe show off your favorite color in a fabric print. Maybe if I had this panel and I didn't like the darker gray, but I loved the lighter gray, or maybe it was pink and purple and I really loved the pink. I can use the quilting to make areas pop out and kind of come to the forefront. So again, really, really fun way to use that thing that you loved about your quilt to guide your quilting designs. Now, when I'm looking at a quilt that has a lot of bold fabrics, which is usually tulas, sometimes it'll alternate between busy and a solid or a tonal print. And so here you can see exactly what that looks like. We have those two elongated diamonds with her fabrics, and I just went around the elements in there, just kept it nice and simple. And I saved the more complex quilting or any quilting that's a little bit fussier for those solid or tonal fabrics. It's like those plume feathers in that elongated kind of diamond. I'm just going for something with a nice texture, something that just, looks pretty, but saving the quilting that's gonna be, I don't want to say fussier, but a little bit more dense or complex on that area. But another thing I want to show you, in between those diamonds is that dot fabric that she has. And one of my favorite ways to quilt that is to go around the circle and echo it. In fact, one of the quilts I'm quilting for her right now has a similar print to that, and I'm doing the same thing. And I keep trying to think of a different way to quilt those dots, but it's just so great because those dots kind of pop up like bubble wrap, and the rest just has a nice texture. So when you find something that works, you can just keep going with it and having fun with it. Now this quilt, and I'm not the best at taking pictures, as you can tell. Like, I took a picture of this quilt. I did this a while ago. And I'm like, well, I wonder why I didn't take a picture of the whole quilt, just here. But even though the fabrics are your favorite things, you can also use that to guide your quilting, of course, but also kind of like lean into that. So here we have hexagons that she's pieced. These are all prints. So the only thing pieced are the actual hexagons. Those stripes are not actually pieced into it. So at the very top of the picture, you can see the white and the pink stripes. I love making it look like it's pieced, even though it's not. So traveling along the lines of that fabric, adding some detail and every other, like in the pink and leaving the white unquilted, just gives it that illusion that it's pieced. So again, using the lines that are already there, but embellishing it a little bit and adding some of my own detail to really kind of bring out this secondary design. Now, you can't see it because it's in my head, but a quilt I'm doing for her right now is very similar to this. I can't wait to show that to you, where I'm kind of adding some details to make something look pieced, even though it's not, and creating secondary patterns. But again, that's just a tease. You'll have to wait till I'm done with it to see that. But in the very center of here, we have a solid fabric. So she kind of interspersed some of her true colors, her blenders, in with solids. And so I quilted those solids the same way and added some of the details that were actually in the fabric. So in that blue hexagon right in the center, quilting some circles in there just because there was already a lot of circles in the fabrics. So again, trying to keep it easy on myself, like what's already on here? Obviously she likes dots. She designed it, so I don't think she's gonna mind a couple dots in the solid fabrics. So again, just looking to that as your guide, you might find that it's actually pretty inspiring that you can kind of come up with so many ideas off of one piece of fabric. Now, I've talked through prior about quilting English paper pieced quilts. She is such a fast English paper piece quilter. I don't know how she does it so fast. And the cool thing about that is there's a lot of fussy cutting when it comes to that. Her blocks and most, not most, but some English paper piecers will fussy cut their fabrics. And so using the quilting to highlight that fussy cutness, ishness of it is a great way to highlight it. So of course, in that center pentagon, that five-sided polygon thing, going around the elements, that cute little detail in there. But then in those those triangles that surround it to make the star, she'd fussy cut each of those little dots. So making sure the quilting didn't cover that up, it just kind of lets that shine. I love kind of using the quilting to show off her fussy cutting skills. And then in the solid fabrics, whatever, in that point, you can do whatever you want. And then those setting diamonds around the outside, I just did some continuous curve because I knew it would help me go from one point to the next and move my way along. So again, just kind of not only looking at the fabric, but how it's being used in the quilt to use the quilting to show it off. And if you look in closer at that middle detail, this bug, I don't know what kind of bug it is, a moth or something. I went around some of the elements, but it's not like I was quilting those little feathers in the wings or the little flowers in the background. I'm just getting the outline of it. I'm kind of getting that detail and then moving on. And what's great about this is you can use echoing to maneuver your way through the block. So after I've highlighted that, went around some of those other elements, then I can just echo my way around and get to where I need to go. Again, using a thread color that matches is very important because I don't want the quilting to take away from that fabric. But the good news is usually you can find a neutral color in the value that you're working with that will go over a range of colors. And just looking at this, I think that's probably a yellow that I used. But since it's a light yellow, it doesn't take away from the quilting in the pink areas. This is going to be really good practice for you as well, seeing what threads look like on different colors of fabric and different fabrics. Because if you're quilting around all these elements, you're not going to change thread colors, or you're not going to want to. I'm not going to want to. I'm not going to change to a pink thread to go around the wings and to an orange thread to do the inside. I mean, I love Tula, but I don't love her that much. So you'll get to see like, wow, that yellow, that magic yellow color really does look great on a range of colors. So it's kind of fun. Now, sometimes a fabric is not necessarily your favorite part, but it's just very busy, or you're not going to see the quilting a whole lot, especially like with these ombre kind of colors. And so instead of quilting around those elements, I'm letting the colors of the fabric guide me. This is great for improvisationally pieced quilts, or where I can say, in this color fabric, I'm going to do this, and in this color fabric, I'm going to do that. So looking at this quilt, I decided in the warmer colors to do some clamshells or some orange peels, and in the cooler colors, do some wonky straight line quilting. And again, just letting the fabric kind of guide where the designs go after I've decided which design will go in which area. And it's just a nice way to add a little bit of contrast to a print or a fabric that you're really not going to see a lot of detail. All the time, if I do like a help, how do I quilt it at a guild, or somebody shows a quilt, if it has busy fabrics, I'm usually like, do whatever you want because you're not going to see the quilting anyway, which is fun, right? You don't have to have the stress of worrying about it, but you can give it a subtle difference just by picking contrasting designs. So straight lines with curves. I could have done swirls in the warm and maybe some boxy designs in the cool, just something that's slightly different. You can also play around with scale, something smaller in one and bigger in the other. Nothing that's going to really overwhelm, because usually if the fabric is busy, you're not going to see the quilting a whole lot, but just enough to kind of hint at that contrast. My favorite thing to do, though, is whenever I get fabrics, especially like this and this pineapple, is to kind of like, look, is there a pattern that it makes? Is there a way that I can highlight it? And just having fun with it, especially if the blocks have all different fabrics. I feel like I can use different designs in each block. I feel like I don't have to keep them all the same. I can let that print dictate what I'm going to do. So in the left pineapple, I thought, oh, I'll just do some wavy lines in between it. Those cute little details in the fabric were kind of on a grid. And so I knew that it would just be the perfect way to help me space out those wavy lines. Plus, it kind of looks like a pineapple, doesn't it? I was super amused with that. I'm not going to lie. Probably one of the easier blocks in that quilt that I quilted, but I loved how it turned out. So the fabric kind of gave me a guide as far as how those elements or the design was placed out, and I could just use that as a guide instead of marking out my lines. But then in the green one with all those little cute fruits, doing just like I would have done those dots, going around them and just filling in everything but them to make them kind of pop out. This is going to work in smaller prints. Maybe like these aren't those huge focal prints that she has. These are more the blenders that she put in there. And so again, kind of changing it up depending on the fabric that you're using. Of course, I'm not trying to go around each little leaf of each little pear that's in there. I'm just kind of hitting the high notes, getting around the outside and moving on. And you can see a couple more from that quilt. The far left, that ombre bluish green block, that was such a beautiful blender, but it was so tonal that I couldn't really pull out any of the elements with the quilting. So I just picked something, a motif, something to stand alone and to make it look fun. But then in the bird, in the next one with the white, again, going around the details, I don't have a much closer picture, but I wasn't trying to go around the eyes or the beak of the bird. I'm just kind of hitting some of those lines that are in there and moving on. just to kind of hint at that detail. It does not have to be like, ooh, over the top. Now, the gal whose quilt this belongs to, Heather Luderman, she actually was on here earlier, and then I forgot to tell her I was using a picture of her quilt. In those busier fabrics where they're tonal, maybe they're meant to create one whole piece, like this double wedding ring. Those arcs are all pieced with different fabrics, and they're so pretty, but they blend together to make one big ring. And so most often, I'll say like 90% of the time, if it's pieced with different fabrics, I'll quilt each fabric differently because, you know, I want to show off that pieced effect. But sometimes that's not the effect that's happening. It's more like it's kind of blending in. And so just going with something with nice, consistent texture, like the half feather, is just going to give it a nice look without drawing attention to each individual piece. Because sometimes highlighting each individual piece can really detract from that main effect that they were going for. Now, when I was quilting this, I thought it'd be fun to do something geometric in the center and curvy in the outside, and she was nice and gave me a lot of freedom to do what I wanted to. So it wasn't like I was like, oh, I know that she really wants this piece to be, you know, one whole piece. But again, just kind of not only looking at the fabric, not only looking at the block, but how the fabric is used within the block. Now, let me come back to you. One thing I want to talk about, though, this is all meant to be kind of I'll say inspiring, if somebody could call their own stuff inspiring. It's meant to help get you think about designs to pick for your quilt, but it's definitely okay to quilt that quilt however you want. If you want to go around all the details, perfect. If you want to do a full custom feather in a busy fabric, absolutely. Whatever you love, because ultimately the best design to pick is one that you will quilt. So hopefully that's given you some little bit of peek into the chaos that is my mind. Sometimes I'm talking and I'm like, wow, I really overthink this stuff. It's fun. I love to do it. And so hopefully that's given you some guidelines to help you pick designs for your quilts or how I go about it. Now, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them. Jessica's writing furiously and I'll answer those. But like I said, there were a couple questions that came up in the type chat, so I'll just address those real quick. First of all, about wide backs. Somebody asked, do I pre-wash wide backs before I quilt them? And the answer is no, 100%. I never pre-wash anything, and I will say it's probably because I'm lazy. I don't want to wash it to have to dry it, to have to iron it. I just want to get the thing loaded. But the thing about wide backs is the way that they're woven is sometimes they won't all lay super flat. Tubeless wide backs, I never have a problem with that, but like sometimes I'll load a wide back and maybe it's taut over here and a little bit looser over there. So if that happens, I might have to hit it with an iron or some starch just to help it lay flat. But other than that, it doesn't really change anything. So hopefully that helps. Okay, this question comes up quite regularly. We get questions about it at the shop. We get questions through email, the Midnight Quilt Show. So for those of you that are aware, I used to do a show for Craftsy called the Midnight Quilt Show. It was on YouTube. It was so much fun. Definitely one of the highlights of my whole career. And I really had fun showing you a quirkier side of me. Truly how I am most of the time. But when Craftsy was bought by Blueprint, and then Blueprint decided to not make the Midnight Quilt Show anymore, and then Blueprint actually shut down. Well, what happened is, not that you care, but another company came in and said, hey, we want to buy all your assets and we want to rebrand them back as Craftsy. So the Craftsy now, if I understand this correctly, and you should contact them for the actual truth, or if make sure I'm saying this right, but if I remember correctly, they did not purchase any of the patterns. So those patterns that were on the Midnight Quilt Show do not belong to me. I was contracted to host it. I was paid, if pattern had my name on it, I designed it, but they bought it from me. So those patterns are somewhere out in the ether and I don't have access to them. So I'm really sorry. I know that's disappointing, especially since those Midnight Quilt Show videos are still out there. So unfortunately, those patterns are not there. So how's that for some bad news, right? All right, can I share info about the next Build a Quilt? So Build a Quilt is our Block of the Month program. I like to say it's like a Block of the Month, but better. And it's a way that you can customize your quilt. And so we have 10 blocks, and you can pick from 3 different fabric collections and 3 different optional layouts. What I'll do is next week, I'll go into a little bit more detail about that and kind of show all the pictures and show you all that, because it's open. It only opens up registration once a year. And that time is now. So it starts in November and then it will close until next fall. So I will do that. All right. Hello from Alabama. Hi, Alabama. I'm terrified about starting and stopping on my domestic machine. I worry about thread, scared it will come undone if you backstitch a few times. Is that good enough? That's good enough for me. When I'm quilting, and this is every quilt, I take a few stitches in place. I pull up the bobbin thread, I take a few stitches in place, and then I zing on my happy way. And then eventually come back and trim off those tails flush with the quilt top. Now, don't do that and expect to win a ribbon at a quilt show. I'm not a show quilter, so it's a totally different ball of wax over there. So I think it's going to be fine. Each little stitch that those 2 threads makes is like a little knot that helps secure it. But if you were worried that it was going to come out, you can put a dab of fray check or fabric glue to help hold it. I will say that I do try to have my starts and stops in a seam or somewhere it's not noticeable, because I don't really want that to be noticeable. And I try not to stop and start as much as I possibly can. So I know that's kind of worrisome, especially if you're like, I haven't done a lot of quilts and I don't know if this is going to come out. But the best example I use is if you've ever taken out quilting, you know that stuff does not just come out. Like 20 seconds to put in, 20 minutes to take out is the ratio of quilting. I think and I don't know, this is just my opinion, the burying threads, I think, really stems from hand quilting, where you had one thread that was running through the fabrics. And if that initial knot came out, then that thread would unravel. Machine quilting, in my opinion, which I'm only the expert of, I don't do that, and I think it's fine. But you have to wrestle with that and find what works for you. And if you're watching this now and you're like, I bury my threads, great, you keep doing that. When I have a large panel with a large animal face, how should I quilt it without messing it up? Oh, those are the best, aren't they? It's a wolf with the moon behind it and a thunderstorm rolling in. You're like, oh my gosh, anything I put on here is going to ruin it. So think texture, think consistent, think texture. Lines that are similarly spaced, whether they're close or far apart, and over the whole quilt. So maybe just some wavy lines like I did in that Dream Big panel, even just a crosshatch. You might think, but I'm quilting through the face. Yeah, but it's consistent and it's not, I don't know, detracting from there. And the best analogy I have for that, I've got something for everything, just in case you're wondering, is if you're ever standing in front of a fence looking through it, eventually you just look through the fence, right? You don't notice the fence anymore. And at that point, the quilting is just kind of there, but you look through it to the panel. If you want to show off some of those elements, you want to highlight that, then you can definitely do that, but just think texture. Wavy lines, nothing too fussy, nothing too contrasting. Unless you're thread painting, that's a whole different thing. But I get it, especially when you look at that panel. It's very pictorial. It's a very recognizable thing. It's not abstract. And you're like, I can't imagine it quilted. I'm afraid I'm going to ruin it. But I promise, just use a neutral thread, keep the quilting fairly consistent, and it will look great. It will look beautiful. Do I usually do denser quilting in the areas outside of the detailed areas? So like around something. It depends. That is my answer for everything. But it depends on how much I want to show off that detail. So let's say I did quilt around a fabric that was that pretty little bug or something, and I really wanted that to pop. Like that was a center, or that's like the most important thing. Then yeah, I'll do some denser quilting around it, and that contrast will make it pop out. Kind of like on that pineapple with the little fruits. I call those fruit snacks in my head. They look like little fruit snacks. They really pop off of there because of the contrast. Now, if I have quilted something detailed and I don't like how it turned out, then I'm not going to do denser quilting. I'm going to do something similar around it. It's that kind of idea that if I have two different things, they'll separate. If they are similar, they'll kind of blend in together. So that's a lot of fun because what you put around something can help highlight it or hide it, which is always good. What do I think of straight line or walking foot quilting? I think it's great, especially if you don't like free motion quilting, especially if you're scared of free motion quilting, especially if you're like, I just want to get this finally frickin' finished and I'm good with straight lines. Absolutely. The one limitation to walking foot quilting is you're going to be turning your quilt a lot. So I probably wouldn't do really ornate geometric designs because that's a lot of rotation on that quilt and it just takes longer to do. I think it'd be great for long straight lines or longer crosshatch or bigger areas. And you can even throw on your decorative stitch or put your walking foot on and still get a little bit of movement. I think it's great. Ultimately, it just depends on what you want to do, what you have time to do, and what you like to do. That's really all there is to it. Do I change thread colors on the dots on echo quilting? No. I pick the thread color to match the background, and I try really hard to keep the thread out of those dots. The one I'm working on right now for Tula has these beautiful little fluorescent dots on the background. And I'm like, oh, I can't quilt it with fluorescent thread. I mean, that would look great, but she's not really selling my quilting, so I'm sure that's not ideal. So I'm matching the thread to the background there. So again, that's just my opinion. You can, play around with that, but that's how I work that out. Oh, this is a good one. How would you quilt a quilt with embroidery blocks in it? Embroidery blocks, cross stitch, any big area of handwork that you really, really don't want to quilt through, but you have to, because if it's a big area and you leave that unquilted, it's going to be kind of wrinkled. It's going to detract from it. So a couple of options here. When I get these, or when I would used to get them, I'm like, I don't know. Crosshatch, something like you would do in that busier panel, something consistent in texture, nothing too fussy. And I think it's also good because that quilting will help kind of secure some of those lines, that handwork. Or leave it unquilted and come back and hand tack some little areas just to help hold it down. It really depends on how old that is, like if you have vintage embroidery, vintage cross stitch, and really what you're going for. That might be one of those instances where I would look to monopoly thread or monofilament thread that's clear, because it literally just kind of disappears into the quilt, or a thinner thread. At that point, the quilting is serving purely function in that area, but I don't want it to take away from the element. If at all possible, though, if I have to quilt in it, maybe it's medium size, I might just go around some of the lines. Like let's say it's a flower, I might add a little thing in the center there, but I try not to do a lot of detail in there because the most important thing about that is somebody took the time to do all that handwork, which is just amazing to me. What bobbin thread color do I like to use the most? Well, it really depends on the top thread, but I will tell you the one I use the most is like off-white, because anything that's light on the top, light, white, light yellow, pink, anything like that, I kind of stick with that off-white. I rarely use white or black. I usually kind of aim for like a light or a dark gray or like off-white. So that's what I tend to use the most. Do I plan on how I'm going to quilt a quilt, or do I just do it as I go? Wouldn't it sound great if I said, I just do it. I just wing it. I have no idea. I stand up to it and the quilt just tells me what it wants. It's a kind of in between those two. I don't plan out the whole quilt because I do know once I get started, I'm probably going to change my mind. But I need to know what I'm going to do in one particular area. Again, I know you can't see this quilt, but this quilt I'm doing for Tula has big squares on point and has these big setting triangles. And in this big setting triangles is that dot fabric. And so I was like, I really want to do a cool feather in there, but I really want to show off her fabric. And so I kind of skipped past that and started on the blocks. So sometimes I won't know what I'm going to do in an area, but usually once I get going, then the ideas come. Or it just gets to a point where you're like, I've got to do something because I want to work through it. So kind of in between. I know what I'm going to do in at least one area of that quilt. But I will say usually the first row of a quilt takes about half the time, and then the rest goes a lot faster once I know how I'm going to do it. So hope that helps. Good question. Did I use double batting on the pineapple quilt? I did. So for most of Tula's quilts, almost all of them, there's a couple that I don't, we use double batting because it makes them lay nice and flat. It really makes that quilting pop, and it looks great in pictures. But I will tell you, all the photos that I'm showing are edited so that you can see the quilting. So I've kind of adjusted it. So it's not quite like you look at it and like, whoa, wow, look at all that detail. So hope that makes sense. How would I quilt around a little fish print? Okay, perfect example here. So you have this fabric. It's adorable. Has little fish on it. If they're tiny, I probably wouldn't try quilting around them. I might just do some wavy lines to signify like water, or maybe some longer swirls. And I might quilt my swirls or my wavy lines so they kind of work around the fish, not going around the detail, but kind of leaving them unquilted would be kind of how I would handle that. But it really depends, again, how big that is, how that print's being used, and what effect I'm going for. But that's kind of how I would handle that, just by imagining what it looks like. Great questions. Great questions. Next week, I've had a request on the type chat. I get on YouTube about half an hour before we go live, and we type and chat, so join us if you can. And somebody asked if I would give tips on squaring up a quilt after quilting, and so I thought that's a great topic. I've never talked about that, so I'll talk about that next week. And don't forget, if you want to take advantage of that exclusive offer just for my live chatters, 30% off any inked fabric, use promo code INKED. Click the link in the description box and you can see those prints. Anyway, so I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Happy quilting.